He tossed the divorce papers across the mahogany table like they were trash, laughing as they slid off the edge and hit the floor. "Sign it, Sarah," he sneered, adjusting his $50,000 Patek Philippe watch. "Take the 10 grand and get out. Honestly, you're embarrassing me in front of the board." He thought she was just a struggling nurse from Ohio who clipped coupons to buy groceries. He had no idea that the cheap locket she wore around her neck was actually a frantic gift from the late King of Belgium, or that the lawyer sitting silently in the corner wasn't there to represent him, but to protect her from destroying him too quickly. James Caldwell was about to sign away his marriage, but he was really signing his own death warrant in the business world. This is the story of how the man who mocked his wife found out he just divorced the sole heiress to the Van der Hoeven trillions. The conference room on the 45th floor of the Caldwell Tech building offered a panoramic view of the Hudson River, but inside the atmosphere was suffocating. The air smelled of stale espresso and expensive leather, a scent Sarah had come to associate with her husband's rising ego. James Caldwell sat at the head of the table, legs crossed, looking every bit the tech mogul he desperately wanted to be. At 32, he had just secured a Series B funding round that valued his company at $40 million. He felt untouchable. To his right sat Jessica Pierce, his chief marketing officer, and, as the tabloids had already guessed, his muse. She was scrolling through her phone, barely suppressing a smirk. Opposite them sat Sarah. She wore a simple beige cardigan that had seen better days and a pair of sensible flats. Her hands were folded in her lap, her posture straight but unthreatening. She looked exactly like what she was, a pediatric nurse who worked 12-hour shifts. Or at least, that's what James saw. "We don't have all day, Sarah," James said, checking his watch again. It was a Patek Philippe Nautilus, a gift he had bought for himself the day the funding cleared. "I have a lunch meeting at Le Bernardin in an hour. Just sign the papers. The terms are generous." Sarah looked down at the document. "Generous." "James," she said softly, her voice steady. "You're offering me $10,000 and asking me to sign an NDA that prevents me from ever discussing our 7 years together. We built this company. I coded the original interface for the prototype in our studio apartment while you slept." James laughed, a sharp, barking sound that made Jessica giggle. "You helped with some formatting, Sarah. Don't rewrite history. I built this. Me. My vision. You were supportive, like a good housewife. But let's be real. You don't fit the brand anymore. Look at you." He gestured vaguely at her outfit. "I'm meeting with investors from Dubai next week. I need someone who looks like they belong in a Bentley, not a Honda Civic." Jessica leaned forward, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "Honey, take the money. It's a lot for someone like you. You can finally pay off those student loans." Sarah's eyes flickered to Jessica. "Someone like me? You know?" Jessica shrugged. "Civilian. Normal. It's okay to be average, Sarah. James is just exceptional." Sarah looked back at James. She didn't look angry. She looked disappointed. A deep, profound disappointment that James mistook for defeat. "Are you sure about this, James?" Sarah asked one last time. "Once I sign this, there is no going back. I am offering you a chance to handle this with dignity. We can separate amicably. You don't need to insult me." James slammed his hand on the table. "Dignity? You want dignity? Dignity is me giving you a check instead of fighting you for the coffee maker. Sign the damn papers, Sarah. I'm done carrying dead weight." Silence stretched in the room. In the corner, a man in a grey suit who had been introduced simply as Mr. Blackwood, a notary, shifted slightly. He hadn't said a word. He was looking at James with an expression that could best be described as a predator watching a wounded gazelle. Sarah picked up the pen. It was a cheap plastic one James had left near the edge, not the Mont Blanc he used. "Okay," she whispered. She signed her name, Sarah Caldwell. "There." James snatched the papers away before the ink was dry. "Done. Finally. The check is with my assistant outside. Don't make a scene on your way out." Sarah stood up. She picked up her worn leather bag. She didn't ask for the check. "Goodbye, James," she said. "I hope the view is worth it." She turned and walked toward the heavy glass doors. "Wait," James called out, a final jab to boost his ego in front of Jessica. "What are you going to do now? Go back to Ohio? If you need a reference for a nursing job, let me know. I know some hospital admins." Sarah stopped. She didn't turn around. She just opened the door and walked out. As the door clicked shut, Mr. Blackwood, the notary, stood up. He didn't follow Sarah immediately. He walked over to the table and picked up the plastic pen Sarah had used. "You should have let her keep the Mont Blanc," Mr. Blackwood said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the subservient tone he had feigned earlier. James frowned. "Who asked you? Just notarize the seal and get out." Mr. Blackwood smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the mahogany. James looked at it. It wasn't a notary service. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock with embossed gold lettering. Adrian Blackwood, Senior Counsel, the Vanderhoven Trust, Zurich, New York, Singapore. Vanderhoven? James squinted. Like the shipping conglomerate? The bank? The dynasty, Blackwood corrected. "I wasn't here to notarize your divorce, Mr. Caldwell. I was here to witness the activation of the clean break clause in Sarah's pre-inheritance trust. She couldn't access her grandfather's estate until she was either 35 or divorced from the man her grandfather explicitly disapproved of." James felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "What are you talking about? Sarah's dad was a mechanic in Dayton." "Her stepfather was a mechanic in Dayton," Blackwood said, snapping his briefcase shut. "Her mother was Isadora Vanderhoven, who walked away from the family fortune for love. Sarah is the sole living heir to Hendrik Vanderhoven, and as of," he checked his Rolex, "2 minutes ago, she is single, and the sole proprietress of the venture capital firm that owns 60% of your company's debt." James's face went white. Jessica stopped scrolling on her phone. "You're lying," James whispered. "I don't lie, Mr. Caldwell. I litigate," Blackwood said. "And just so you know, Sarah didn't want to use the money. She wanted to build a life with you. She loved you. But you just called the woman who owns the building we are standing in dead weight." Blackwood walked to the door. "Enjoy your lunch at Le Bernardin. I believe Sarah owns that building too. I'll let the maitre d' know you're coming. I wouldn't expect a good table." The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like a decompression chamber for Sarah. She leaned her forehead against the cool metal of the doors, taking deep, shuddering breaths. She wasn't crying. The tears had run out months ago, somewhere between James's third, late night at the office, and the lipstick stain she found on his collar in March. She was shaking, not from sadness, but from the adrenaline of restraint. For 7 years, she had played the role of the supportive wife. She had hidden who she was because she wanted to be loved for herself, not for the 11-figure trust fund sitting in a Swiss account with her biometrics as the key. She wanted to know that the man holding her hand would still hold it if she were penniless, and she had gotten her answer. The elevator dinged. The lobby of the Caldwell building, technically the Vanderhoven Plaza, though James never looked closely at the property deeds, was bustling. Security guards nodded at her familiarly. "Have a good day, Mrs. Caldwell," one said. "It's Miss van der Hoven," she corrected softly, though he didn't hear her. She pushed through the revolving doors into the biting New York wind. It was November, and the city was grey and hostile. She walked toward the curb where her beat-up 2016 Honda Civic was parked. As she reached for her keys, a sleek, black Maybach pulled up to the curb, sandwiching her Honda. The rear window rolled down. Sitting inside was an older woman with silver hair cut in a sharp bob, wearing Chanel sunglasses and a look of eternal dissatisfaction. It was Eleanor van der Hoven Roth, Sarah's aunt. Technically, her estranged aunt. "Get in, Sarah," Eleanor said. "Adrian texted me. He said the idiot actually signed." Sarah sighed, looking at her Honda. "I have to drive my car home, Aunt Eleanor." "Burn it," Eleanor snapped. "We have a jet waiting at Teterboro. Grandfather is declining. He wants to see you, now that you're finally free of that parasite." Sarah froze. "Grandfather? I thought he was in remission." "Hendrik van der Hoven doesn't do remission. He negotiates with death until he gets better terms," Eleanor said dryly. "But yes, he's weak, and he wants to introduce you to the board before he passes. Get in the car." Sarah looked back at the skyscraper. Up on the 45th floor, James was probably realizing his world was collapsing. She looked at the Honda, filled with empty coffee cups and her nursing scrubs in the back. She opened the door of the Maybach and slid onto the heated leather seats. "Adrian is handling the car," Eleanor said, signaling the driver. "And Sarah, fix your hair. You look like you've been working for a living." "I have been," Sarah said, leaning back as the car accelerated effortlessly into traffic. "Well, that's over." Eleanor handed her a tablet. "Read this. It's the portfolio you now control. Vanguard Holdings, the shipping lines in Rotterdam, the lithium mines in Nevada, and, oh yes, the majority stake in a certain tech incubator called Silicon Rise." Sarah's eyes widened as she looked at the screen. Silicon Rise. They are the primary investors in James's company. "Precisely," Eleanor smirked. "James thinks he answers to a board of directors. As of this afternoon, he answers to you. Do you want us to crush him today? Or do you want to play with your food?" Sarah stared at the numbers scrolling on the screen. The wealth was unfathomable. It was enough to buy countries, let alone ruin one arrogant man. She thought about James's laugh. "You don't fit the brand anymore." "Don't crush him yet," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "He wants to be a big player. Let's see how he plays when the game is rigged." Meanwhile, back in the boardroom, James was frantically Googling. Van der Hoven, family net worth. Isadora van der Hoven daughter. Hendrik van der Hoven heir. The results were sparse. The family paid millions to keep their private lives off the internet. But what he found made him nauseous. A scanned article from a 1995 Dutch newspaper showed a grainy photo of a 4-year-old girl holding the hand of a giant of industry. The caption read, "The secret heiress, Isadora's child, Sarah, returns to the fold." "It's not possible," James muttered. "She clipped coupons. We ate instant ramen for 3 years. Jessica, who had gone pale, looked up from her phone. "James, I just got an email from the bank." "Not now, Jessica." "James, you need to listen," she screeched. "It's from Credit Suisse. They're freezing the credit line for the Series B expansion. They cited a change in risk assessment due to leadership instability." "What instability? I'm the CEO." "And," Jessica swallowed hard, "our landlord just emailed. They are invoking a clause in the lease. We have 30 days to vacate the premises for renovations." James slumped into his chair. The leather suddenly felt very hot. "Get Blackwood on the phone," James roared. "Get him back here." But Adrian Blackwood was already gone, and James Caldwell was beginning to realize that the $10,000 he had bullied Sarah into taking was the most expensive money he had ever spent. The Gulfstream GALFIER didn't just land, it seemed to kiss the tarmac of a private airfield just outside Zurich. The flight had been silent. Sarah had spent the 7 hours staring at the portfolio on the tablet, her mind unable to reconcile the numbers with her reality. $2 trillion. Not in cash, of course, but in assets, influence, land, and debt. The Van der Hoeven influence was a subterranean river that watered half the world's economy, and she was the dam keeper. "We're here," Eleanor said, closing her Vogue magazine. "Do you remember the estate?" "Vaguely," Sarah whispered. "I remember a maze and a swan that bit me. The swan died. The maze is still there. Try not to get lost." A convoy of 3 Range Rover Sentinels awaited them. Sarah was ushered into the middle vehicle. As they wound their way up the alpine roads, the scenery shifted from grey industrial efficiency to breathtaking, snow-capped isolation. They passed iron gates that looked heavy enough to stop a tank, winding up a driveway that was longer than the street Sarah had lived on with James. The Huy van der Hoeven wasn't a house. It was a fortress of stone and glass, perched on a cliff overlooking Lake Zurich. They were met at the door not by a butler, but by a medical team. "He's in the solarium," a doctor said, looking grave. "His oxygen levels are low today, Madame Roth. Keep it brief." Eleanor gripped Sarah's arm. "Listen to me. He is dying, but he is not dead. Do not pity him. He hates pity. If you show weakness, he will write you out of the will before his heart stops beating. Stand tall." Sarah straightened her spine. She thought of James laughing at her beige cardigan. She thought of the years she spent scrubbing floors in the hospital while James played CEO. She found a reserve of cold anger she didn't know she possessed. "I'm ready," Sarah said. They entered the solarium. It was a humid, tropical jungle inside the freezing Alps. Orchids bloomed in violent purples and reds. In the center, in a wheelchair that looked more like a command station, sat Hendrik van der Hoeven. He was skeletal, his skin like parchment paper, but his eyes were blue diamonds, sharp, hard, and cutting. "So," his voice was a wet rasp, amplified by a small speaker near his throat. "The prodigal granddaughter returns." "Hello, grandfather," Sarah said. She didn't step forward to hug him. She stood her ground. Hendrik studied her. "You look like your mother." Soft. Isadora was soft. That's why she ran away with a mechanic. She wanted love. He spat the word like it was poison. "And you? You married a peasant who makes apps." "He makes software solutions," Sarah corrected automatically, then stopped. "He made software solutions. Now he mostly makes mistakes." Hendrik's lips curled into a dry smile. "Adrian told me. You signed the papers. You let him humiliate you for $10,000. "I let him show me who he really was," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. "I paid $10,000 to see his true face. I consider it a cheap investment." Hendrik laughed, a wheezing sound that triggered a coughing fit. The nurses rushed forward, but he waved them away with a bony hand. "Good," Hendrik wheezed. "Good. You have the fire, but you are raw ore. You need to be forged." He pressed a button on his chair. "I have little time, Sarah. The wolves are circling, the board members. They think they can carve up my empire when I die. They think a nurse from Ohio cannot stop them. They think you are a sheep." He leaned forward, the machinery of his chair whirring. "You must become a wolf. You will stay here. You will not grieve your marriage. You will bury Sarah Caldwell in the snow. When you walk out of these doors, You will be Sarah van der Hoven. And you will tear that boy's little company apart, piece by piece. Not because you are angry, but because it is good practice. Sarah looked at the dying man. She realized that the sweet, coupon-clipping girl she had been was already dead. James had killed her in that conference room. "Where do we start?" Sarah asked. Hendrik closed his eyes, exhausted. "Eleanor, take her to the vault and get her out of those hideous clothes. She looks like she shops at Walmart." "Target," Sarah corrected, "but point taken." The next 3 weeks were a blur of agony and education. It wasn't a makeover montage from a movie. It was boot camp. Mornings began at 5 a.m. Sarah sat with financial tutors who drilled her on arbitrage, hostile takeovers, and commodities futures. She learned to read a balance sheet faster than she could read a patient's chart. Afternoons were spent with image consultants. They didn't just dress her, they reconstructed her. Her hair was dyed a rich, dark chocolate and cut into a sharp, angular style that framed her face like a helmet. Her wardrobe was purged. The beige cardigans were replaced by structured blazers from Alexander McQueen, silk blouses from Saint Laurent, and heels that clicked on the marble floors like gunshots. She learned to walk differently. Not the hurried shuffle of a nurse trying to get to a code blue, but the languid, terrifying stride of a woman who owns the time she is walking through. But the hardest part was the news from New York. Adrian Blackwood kept her updated. "James is spiraling," Adrian reported one evening over a secure line. "He's frantic. He's trying to sue the bank, but he has no grounds. He's looking for angel investors, but we've quietly blacklisted him with every major firm in the tri-state area. Jessica Pierce has been seen interviewing at Google." "Let him struggle a bit longer," Sarah said, swirling a glass of vintage Pinot Noir. She was wearing a blood-red silk robe, looking out at the snow. "There is a summit coming up, isn't there? The Davos World Economic Forum." "Yes," Adrian said. "Caldwell Tech doesn't have an invite. It's for global leaders." "Get him one," Sarah said. Adrian paused. "You want him there?" "He needs a lifeline," Sarah said coldly. "I want to be the one to cut it." The World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, is where the masters of the universe gather to decide the fate of the world while drinking hot chocolate that costs $40. It is a fortress of ego. James Caldwell felt out of place, and he hated it. He had received the invite anonymously 3 days ago. He assumed it was a clerical error or a stroke of luck. He had maxed out his personal credit cards to charter a flight and book a tiny room in a hotel 3 towns over. He needed money. He needed $50 million to save his company, or by next month he wouldn't be able to make payroll. He stood in the Congress Center, wearing his best Brioni suit, which was now slightly tight. Stress eating had taken its toll. He scanned the room. There were heads of state, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and tech giants. "James?" He turned to see Jessica. She had come with him, but the tension between them was palpable. She looked bored. "Who are we pitching?" she asked, sipping champagne. "Anyone with a pulse and a checkbook," James snapped. "Look, there's the CEO of Petronas. Maybe they need software integration." "James, you look desperate," Jessica whispered. "Stop sweating." Suddenly, a hush fell over the room. The murmuring crowd parted like the Red Sea. "Who is that?" someone whispered near James. "I think that's the Van der Hoven representative," another replied. "Old Hendrik finally kicked the bucket last week. This is the successor." James stood on his toes to see. He expected a stiff old man in a suit. Instead, a woman walked in. She was flanked by 4 security guards and a man who looked like a French movie star, Laurent, her new chief of staff. But no one was looking at them. They were looking at her. She wore a tuxedo-style gown by Givenchy, stark white against the sea of grey and black suits. It was sharp, modern, and aggressive. A diamond choker, simple but comprised of stones the size of quail eggs, rested at her throat. She moved with a fluid, predatory grace. Her face was impassive, her dark hair a sleek curtain. James felt a strange sense of familiarity, a ghost of a memory, but his brain refused to make the connection. The woman looked nothing like the Sarah who wore oversized t-shirts to bed and smelled of antiseptic. This woman looked like she smelled of money and ozone. "That's the heiress," James whispered. "She's stunning." Jessica scowled. "She looks like a bitch." The woman, Sarah, stopped in the center of the room. A circle formed around her immediately. The CEO of Shell, the head of the IMF, and the founder of Amazon all stepped forward to greet her. She nodded to them, shaking hands firmly. Was she speaking French? Yes, fluent French. James saw his opening. If he could just get 5 minutes with the head of the Van der Hoeven Trust, he could bypass the banks. "Stay here," James told Jessica. "James, don't," she warned. "You're not on that level. Watch me." James smoothed his tie and pushed his way through the crowd. He was aggressive, using his elbows, desperate to reach the White Queen in the center of the board. He broke through the inner circle just as Sarah was laughing at a joke made by the French president. "Excuse me," James said, his voice a little too loud. "Madam Van der Hoeven." The circle went silent. Interrupting a conversation at this level was social suicide. Sarah stopped laughing. She turned slowly. For the first time in 2 months, James looked into the eyes of his ex-wife. But he didn't see Sarah. He saw a stranger with Sarah's eyes, but none of her warmth. Her gaze was like looking into a deep, frozen lake. "Yes?" she said, in English, her voice clipped and aristocratic. James faltered. He didn't recognize her. The context was too different, the transformation too total. And frankly, James had never really looked at his wife. He had looked through her. James stammered. "James Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Tech. We have a synergy I think you'd be interested in. I know your family invests heavily in emerging markets and—" Sarah tilted her head slightly. "Caldwell Tech?" She turned to Laurent, her chief of staff. "Do we know this company?" Laurent checked a tablet, though he didn't need to. "Small cap, Series B funding frozen, currently under audit for financial irregularities. Majority debt holder is us, madame." The crowd chuckled. James turned bright red. "There's a misunderstanding with the bank," James said quickly, sweat beading on his forehead. "That's why I wanted to speak with you. If the Van der Hoeven Trust could just extend a bridge loan—" Sarah took a step closer to him. She smelled of crushed roses and cold air. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "I am familiar with your work. You built an interface that aggregates user data for third-party sales. It's derivative at best." James bristled. "It's revolutionary. It's mediocre," she said softly. "Like your judgment." She stepped even closer, invading his personal space. She lowered her voice, so only he could hear. "Tell me, James, how is the nursing staff shortage in Ohio these days?" James froze. The world stopped spinning. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the tiny scar on her chin from when she fell off a bike when she was 7, a story she had told him on their first date. He saw the flecks of gold in her green eyes. His mouth fell open. Sarah." She pulled back, her face returning to a mask of ice. "You are mistaken," she said loudly, addressing the room. "I am Sarah Van der Hoeven, and this man is trespassing on my time." She turned to the head of security. "Remove him. He is distressing my guests." "Wait!" James screamed as two large hands grabbed his shoulders. "Sarah, it's me. Talk to me. Sarah." He was dragged backward, his heels skidding on the polished floor. Jessica Pierce was nowhere to be seen. She had vanished into the crowd the moment things went south. Sarah watched him go, her expression unreadable. "Do you know him, madame?" the French president asked, looking amused. Sarah took a sip of champagne. "I once hired him to do some work," she said calmly. "He was inadequate. Shall we discuss the lithium trade, Monsieur President?" James returned to New York not as a conquering hero, but as a pariah. The video of him being dragged out of the Davos summit had gone viral. It had 12 million views on TikTok under the caption, "Tech Bro tries to hit on billionaire Heiress, finds out." He sat in his office at Caldwell Tech, the lights off, watching the clip on loop. The humiliation burned in his chest like acid. But beneath the shame, a different fire was kindling, rage. She had played him. She had lied to him for 7 years. She had made him believe they were poor, that she was nobody, while she sat on a mountain of gold. "She committed fraud," James muttered to the empty room. "Spousal fraud. She hid assets. I can void the divorce. I can take half." The door swung open. It was Gavin Stone, his CFO and college roommate. Gavin looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "James, stop watching the video," Gavin said, throwing a stack of files on the desk. "We have bigger problems. The renovations notice from the landlord wasn't a bluff. The eviction crew is in the lobby, and Silicon Rise, the VC firm that holds our debt, just called an emergency shareholder meeting." "Tell them to wait," James waved a hand dismissively. "I'm calling my lawyer. I'm going to sue Sarah for everything she has. I'll own the Vanderhoven estate by Christmas." Gavin laughed, a dry, hysterical sound. "You don't get it, do you? You don't sue the Vanderhovens. You survive them. And right now, we aren't surviving." "The shareholder meeting isn't a request, James. It's happening now, in the main conference room." "Who called it?" James stood up, adjusting his tie. "I control the voting shares." "Not anymore," Gavin said quietly. "Check the bylaws. If we default on the Series B interest payments, which we did this morning, the debt converts to equity. Silicon Rise now owns 51% of Caldwell Tech." James felt the blood drain from his face. "Who runs Silicon Rise?" Gavin didn't answer. He just pointed to the door. James marched down the hallway, ignoring the stares of his employees who were frantically packing boxes. He burst into the conference room, the same room where he had forced Sarah to sign the papers 3 months ago. The table was full. The board of directors sat in silence. At the head of the table, where James usually sat, was a woman. She wasn't wearing the glamorous gown from Davos. She was wearing a razor-sharp charcoal suit. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun. "You're late, Mr. Caldwell," Sarah said, not looking up from a file. "Get out of my chair," James snarled, stepping forward. Adrian Blackwood, standing by the window, stepped in James's path. "Sit down, James, or security will remove you again. And this time they won't be as gentle as the Swiss." James slumped into the chair at the far end of the table, Sarah's old seat. "This is illegal," James spat. "You stole my company." "I bought your company," Sarah corrected, "at a discount, because the CEO ran it into the ground." She closed the file and looked at the board. "Motion to remove James Caldwell as chairman of the board, effective immediately," she announced. "Seconded," said a board member James had known for 5 years. "All in favor?" Every hand went up, even Gavin's. James looked at his best friend. "Gavin." "I have a mortgage, James," Gavin whispered, looking down at the table. She offered to keep me on if I voted with the majority. Motion carries, Sarah said, emotionlessly. Now, on to the role of CEO. Usually, we would terminate the CEO for gross incompetence. However, she paused, her green eyes locking onto James's terrified face. I believe Mr. Caldwell has a unique history with the product. Therefore, I am keeping him on as CEO. James blinked. You are? Yes, but with a restructured contract, Sarah signaled Adrian. Adrian slid a thick document down the table. James opened it. His eyes bulged. Salary, $1 a year. James choked out. No stock options. Mandatory 80-hour work weeks. Reporting directly to the board chairwoman. This is slavery. It's a performance improvement plan, Sarah said coolly. You said you built this company, James. You said I was dead weight. Prove it. Fix the bugs. Balance the budget. If you quit, you trigger the non-compete clause which bans you from working in technology for 10 years. If you stay, you work for me. She stood up. The room seemed to tilt around her. And James? The eviction is cancelled. I bought the building this morning. Your office is being moved to the basement. I need the 45th floor for my yoga studio. She walked past him. As she passed, she leaned down, her lips brushing his ear. Welcome to the working class, honey. 2 weeks later, James was working out of a converted storage closet on the B2 level. The ventilation hummed loudly, and the room smelled of cleaning fluid. He was broken, but he wasn't dead. $1, he muttered, typing furiously on his laptop. She thinks she can humiliate me. He wasn't working on the company code. He was digging. James knew Sarah. He knew the Sarah who cried during sad movies, the Sarah who forgot her passwords. He knew there had to be a crack in the armor, and he had found something. Before the divorce, Sarah had used an old laptop, a clunky Dell from 2012. When she left, she took it, but she had left behind an external hard drive in a box of winter clothes she forgot in the closet. James had found the drive the night before. He had spent 12 hours cracking the encryption. It contained journals, digital diaries dating back 10 years. I hate the money, one entry read. I hate the lies. If James knew who I was, he would look at me differently. I have to pretend. I have to be poor to be loved. But it wasn't the sentimentality James was looking for. It was the dates. He found an entry from 3 years ago. Grandfather is pressuring me to sign the trust documents. I have to go to Zurich. I'll tell James I'm visiting my sick aunt in Ohio. James smiled. A cruel, jagged smile. During that week, in Ohio, James had signed a massive contract with a government defense contractor. The contract required strict background checks on all spouses of executive officers to ensure no foreign entanglements. James had filled out the forms, listing Sarah as a U.S. citizen with no foreign assets. Sarah had signed it. If she was secretly the heir to a foreign conglomerate at that time, and she signed a federal affidavit stating she wasn't, that was perjury. That was federal fraud. Gotcha, James whispered. He needed a partner, someone who hated Sarah as much as he did. He picked up his phone and dialed. Jessica, it's me. Don't hang up. I have the nuke. They met in a dive bar in Hell's Kitchen, far away from the prying eyes of the financial district. Jessica looked tired. Her muse status had revoked the moment James fell from grace, and she was currently working as a junior consultant for a firm that sold printer paper. This better be good, James, she said, stirring her watered-down martini. I'm this close to blocking your number. James slid a flash drive across the sticky table. Federal perjury, James said. She lied on a Department of Defense form 3 years ago. If this leaks, she doesn't just lose the company. She goes to federal prison, or she gets deported. Jessica's eyes widened. She plugged the drive into her phone using an adapter and scrolled through the screenshots James had taken. "This is legit," she whispered. "The dates match." "I need you to leak it," James said. "If I do it, it looks like a bitter ex-husband. If you do it, say you found it while auditing the company files, you become a whistleblower. The press will love you." "And what do I get?" "We take her down." James leaned in, his eyes manic. "The stock crashes. She goes to jail. The Van der Hoeven board panics and fires her. I step back in as the steady hand to save the company. And you get your CMO job back. With equity." Jessica looked at James. She looked at the flash drive. "You really think you can beat her?" Jessica asked. "She's just a nurse, Jess. She's playing dress-up. This," he tapped the drive, "is reality." Jessica closed her hand over the drive. A slow smile spread across her face. "Okay, James, let's burn the witch." 3 days later, James sat in his basement office, waiting. Jessica had promised the story would drop at noon. She had a meeting with a reporter from the Wall Street Journal. Noon came. Nothing happened. 12:15 p.m. Still nothing. 12:30 p.m. His phone rang. It was the receptionist from the lobby. "Mr. Caldwell, Ms. Van der Hoeven would like to see you in the boardroom. Immediately." James's heart hammered. She knows. The story must have reached her for comment before publication. She was panicking. She was going to beg him to stop it. He stood up, smoothed his cheap suit, and took the elevator up to the 45th floor. When the doors opened, the office was quiet. Too quiet. He walked into the boardroom. Sarah was there, standing at the head of the table. But she wasn't alone. 2 federal agents in windbreakers with FBI on the back stood near the window. And sitting in a chair, weeping into a tissue, was Jessica. James froze. "James," Sarah said, her voice sounding almost bored. "Please have a seat." "What is this?" James asked, his voice cracking. "Jessica." Jessica looked up, her mascara running. "I'm sorry, James, I had to. They offered me immunity." "Immunity for what?" James shouted. Sarah picked up the flash drive from the table. "The flash drive. For corporate espionage and conspiracy to commit blackmail," Sarah said. "Did you really think, James, that after everything, I wouldn't monitor your communications? Did you think I wouldn't flag a breach of my personal encrypted files?" "It's not blackmail if it's the truth," James yelled, pointing at the agents. "She committed perjury. She lied on the DOD forms. Arrest her." Sarah sighed. She looked at the agents. "Agent Miller, would you explain it to him? He's slow." Agent Miller stepped forward. He looked annoyed to be there. "Mr. Caldwell, we reviewed the allegations. Ms. Van der Hoeven did not commit perjury. At the time the DOD forms were signed 3 years ago, her assets were held in a blind trust controlled by her grandfather. Legally, she did not have access to or control over foreign assets until the clean break clause was activated, which happened the day you divorced her." James's mouth fell open. But she knew. She knew she was rich. "Knowledge of potential future inheritance is not a reportable asset," the agent droned. "However, hacking into a protected server to steal personal data, and then conspiring to use that data to extort a CEO of a publicly traded company, that is a felony." James looked at Jessica. You recorded me?" "I wore a wire, James," Jessica sobbed. "Sarah's lawyer called me 10 minutes after we left the bar. They knew everything. They told me if I helped them catch you, they wouldn't sue me for the unauthorized expense account spending I did last year." James looked back at Sarah. She wasn't smiling. She looked disappointed. "I gave you a job, James. I gave you a chance to work with dignity, and you tried to send me to prison." Sarah nodded to the agents. "Get him out of here." "Wait!" James screamed as the agents grabbed his arms. "Sarah, you can't do this. I'm your husband. Well, ex-husband. We loved each other." "I loved a man who didn't exist," Sarah said, turning her back on him. "And you loved a bank account you couldn't access. Goodbye, James." James was dragged out of the office he once thought he owned, past the employees he used to bully. As the elevator doors closed on his screaming face, Sarah finally sat down. She looked at Adrian Blackwood, who was standing in the shadows. "Is it done?" she asked. "The FBI will hold him for 24 hours. The charges will likely stick. He'll be facing 3 to 5 years, Adrian said. "But are you sure you want to proceed with the final step?" Sarah looked out the window at the skyline of New York. The city looked small from up here. "He wanted to destroy my reputation," Sarah said softly. "He wanted a media circus. I think we should give him one." "What do you mean?" "Bail him out," Sarah said. Adrian raised an eyebrow. "Bail him out? Why?" "Because prison is too private." Sarah turned, her eyes hard as diamonds. "I want him to be free to see what happens next. I'm going to acquire the one thing he loves more than money." "Which is?" "His legacy." The rain outside the Federal Detention Center in Brooklyn was cold and relentless. When James Caldwell walked out the heavy steel doors, he didn't expect a limousine. He expected a taxi, or perhaps a long walk to the subway. He had no phone, no wallet, and his shoelaces had been cut. But there was a car waiting, a familiar black Maybach. The window rolled down. It wasn't Sarah, it was Adrian Blackwood. "Get in, Mr. Caldwell," Adrian said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Ms. van der Hoven has paid your bail." James stood shivering in the rain. "Why?" "She hates me." "She doesn't hate you, James. Hate implies emotional investment," Adrian said, opening the door. "She pities you, and she requires your attendance tonight. Consider it closing arguments." James climbed in. He sat huddled in the corner, the leather seats smelling of success he could no longer touch. "Where are we going?" James asked. "The Metropolitan Museum of Art," Adrian replied. "Tonight is the rebranding gala. The company, formerly known as Caldwell Tech, is launching its 2.0 interface. Sarah thought you should be there to see what the company looks like without dead weight." James straightened up. A spark of defiance ignited in his chest. "She can rebrand all she wants," James sneered, his old arrogance flickering back to life. "But she can't change the code. I wrote the kernel. I built the architecture. Without my genius, that company is just a shell. She's just a nurse playing CEO. She'll crash it in 6 months. Adrian didn't respond. He just smiled, that terrifying, shark-like smile. The Met steps were draped in red carpet. Paparazzi lined the velvet ropes. When James stepped out of the car, disheveled and wearing his wrinkled suit from the arrest, the cameras flashed blindingly. Is that James Caldwell? The one who got arrested? He looks awful. He kept his head down, rushing past the judgment, fueled by the conviction that he was still the intellectual father of everything inside. The Temple of Dendor had been transformed. Giant screens projected the company's new logo, a stylized golden phoenix. The room was filled with the elite, tech moguls, politicians, the very people who had shunned him. James found a corner, grabbing a glass of whiskey from a passing waiter to steady his shaking hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice boomed. Sarah walked onto the stage. She wore gold, not a gown, but a suit made of gold silk that shimmered like liquid metal. She looked like a goddess of war. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah said, her voice amplified, crisp and commanding. Tonight, we celebrate not just a new name, but a new truth." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd, until they landed on James in the shadows. "For years," Sarah continued, "this company operated under a lie. We were told it was built by a singular genius, a visionary. We were told that the Caldwell algorithm was the result of one man's brilliance." She gestured to the massive screen behind her. "But in the spirit of transparency, I decided to conduct a full audit of the source code. And I found something interesting." James gripped his glass. "She's going to claim she bought it," he thought. "She's going to steal my work." "James," Sarah said, addressing him directly. The crowd turned to look at him. The spotlight hit him, blinding and cruel. "You always said you wrote the core interface in our studio apartment while I was sleeping. Do you remember?" "I did," James shouted, his voice cracking. "I coded it from scratch. You were just watching TV." Sarah smiled. "Project the code, please." The screen behind her filled with lines of C++ code. It was complex, dense, and beautiful. It was the heart of the software that made the company worth millions. "This is the kernel," Sarah said. "James, can you explain the function on line 405? James squinted. He stammered. It's a data loop. It aggregates the user input." "Incorrect," Sarah said. "It's a recursive nervous system for the AI. But that's not what I want to show you. Look at the comments." In coding, programmers leave comments, notes hidden in the code that the computer ignores, visible only to other humans reading the script. Sarah motioned, and the screen zoomed in on the metadata of the very first file, created 7 years ago. There, buried in the green text, was a comment. Written by Sarah V.H. 3 M. "Because James is asleep, and he's going to fail his deadline if I don't fix this mess. I love him, even if he isn't as smart as he thinks he is." The room went deadly silent. James stared at the screen. His knees buckled. He remembered the nights. He would work for hours, get stuck, get frustrated, and pass out on the couch. When he woke up, the code would be working. He had always told himself he must have solved it in a fugue state, a stroke of subconscious genius. He hadn't. Sarah had fixed it. Every night. She had come home from a 12-hour shift at the hospital, sat at his computer, and quietly rewritten his sloppy, broken code into a masterpiece. She had let him believe he was a genius because she wanted him to feel confident. "You," James whispered. "You wrote it." "I wrote all of it, James," Sarah said, her voice echoing in the silent hall. "I learned to code when I was 12 at a boarding school in Switzerland. I have a PhD in computational mathematics that I never told you about because you were so insecure about your own intelligence. I hid my degree. I hid my money. I hid my name. All so you could feel big." She took a step forward on the stage. "You didn't build this company. You were the mascot." James dropped his glass. It shattered on the stone floor, the sound sharp and final. "Tonight," Sarah announced, turning back to the crowd, "we are erasing the lie. Caldwell Tech is no more. Effective immediately, the company is rebranded as Isadora Systems in honor of my mother. And we are releasing the source code as open source, because unlike my ex-husband, I don't need to hoard knowledge to feel important." The crowd erupted in applause. It was a standing ovation. James stood in the center of the cheering crowd, but he was alone. He wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a CEO. He wasn't even a coder. He was a fraud who had divorced the only person who had ever made him look competent. Adrian Blackwood appeared at his elbow. "The show is over, Mr. Caldwell," Adrian whispered. "The bail conditions state you must remain within the jurisdiction, but I suggest you leave this building. You're trespassing." James looked at Sarah one last time. She was laughing with the CEO of Apple, radiant, powerful, and utterly out of his reach. She didn't look back at him. He was already a memory. James turned and walked out of the temple, past the red carpet and into the dark, rainy night. He checked his pockets. He had $5 and a metro card with one ride left. He walked to the subway station. He swiped the card. Insufficient fare. James Caldwell, the man who mocked his wife for clipping coupons, leaned his head against the cold metal of the turnstile and began to weep. The downfall of James Caldwell wasn't just a financial collapse. It was the total deconstruction of a man who mistook privilege for talent and love for subservience. He spent the rest of his days working IT support for a mid-sized paper company in New Jersey, forever haunted by the face of the woman he discarded. Sarah van der Hoeven went on to lead the family dynasty into a new golden age, proving that true power doesn't need to shout to be heard. She never remarried, but she was never alone. She had her empire, her legacy, and the satisfaction of knowing that the best investment she ever made was the $10,000 she paid to get her life back. The Montblanc pen she used to sign the takeover documents sits on her desk to this day, a reminder that dignity is priceless, but revenge? Revenge is best served with a side of cold, hard cash. Wow, talk about a reality check. If you loved seeing James get exactly what he deserved, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you want more stories about karma, hidden identities, and epic revenge, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. What would you have done if you were Sarah? Would you have bailed him out just to humiliate him? Or would you have let him rot in jail? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.